Get 5 coffins ready.
Hey everyone, welcome to my guide for Bacchus. Bacchus is a hyper-aggressive tank in SMITE who focuses on dealing lots of damage. Like Atlas last time though, there are a lot of holes in his game plan that see him struggle when compared to more meta supports. Still though, he's a fun god who's still decent in most scenarios, so let's hop into it with some builds. Bacchus builds tanky, huge surprise I know. And he typically goes in one of two directions with this. Bacchus' CC is slow and risky to apply, so you need to make up for that risk by going some raw damage in case things go south. Alternatively, Bacchus may also just go ridiculously tanky with a bunch of CDR, making up for the fact that his CC is more risky to apply by being able to attempt it frequently, rather than relying on less frequent instances of CC but with more impact like with the damage-oriented build. But in either case, still focus on mostly being tanky so you can apply all that CC. Relics wise, as per usual, you want to start out with a defensive relic, something like Meditation or a Shell, then going into something aggressive. Blink is great on Bacchus since, like an assassin, he can blink, CC, and then use his movement ability to chase any enemies who run away with their movement ability. But if you're in a situation where the enemy backliners don't have movement abilities, or their movement abilities are lackluster, you can go something like Horrific Emblem instead. Shard-wise, you have a lot of options. Claw Shard is great when you have a duo partner who is extremely aggressive and focuses on burst. Then Carapace is better for when your teammate is aggressive, but takes more extended trades. And finally, if you're not sure what to do or just have a passive duo partner, Horn Shard is your all reliable. And finally, recipe-wise, just Sturdy Stew will do. Although Bountiful Bow does have a great interaction with Bacchus' first ability. Bacchus takes a chug of his wine, filling his passive meter by 40%. Bacchus' passive is divided into thirds, and he gains bonuses based on how full the meter is. While in the first third it has no effect, being in the second section grants 10 power and 5% damage mitigation, and being in the third and final section grants 30 power and 10% damage mitigation, but it doesn't stack with the previous sector. You can only have one of the two bonuses from this passive at a time. The meter is constantly draining though, so you need to constantly be chugging to keep the meter up, and that's why the chug gives you 40% instead of just enough to get over the sector threshold. Bacchus also gains bonuses when he takes that initial chug, but not so fast. Bacchus can actually use this ability without even putting a level into it. This version of the ability still costs mana to cast and will offer the full 40% meter gain. Once this ability is leveled, it will also grant Bacchus a small heal, give him protections, and give him a bit of power. So you want to stay at full meter at all times, but this brings up a question. Do you want to save this ability for when you're going in to make use of that bonus power and protections, or just keep chugging all the time to keep yourself topped up all the time? Well, you typically want to keep yourself in that third sector at all times, but there are of course two ways to do that. Chug every time you run out of wine in that sector, or chug every time you almost fall out of the second sector, giving you just enough to be in that third sector, and which one you choose depends on which stage of the game you're in. For best mana consumption, you really only want to use this ability when you're about to run out of the second section, then top up to get yourself into that third section. This gives you a good balance between staying in the third section in case things go bad, like an enemy jungle gank, but ensures you don't use too much mana to keep the passive up. Then later on into the match, you want to slam your wine every single time you can to ensure you don't get out of that third sector. You do this because the bonuses that come from that third sector, plus the actual bonuses from your first ability themselves, are more important than ever in the late game. Plus now you have the mana to spam that ability. You don't even want to think about needing to use this ability to get your bonuses before taking action in the late game. Remember, that half second you use to chug your wine could be all it takes for the enemy team to make a decisive move that loses you the game. Therefore, you want to keep pounding the wine and keep yourself in the third sector as often as possible. Kinda sounds like me on a Saturday night, huh fellas? Especially since the bonuses work well in enhancing both the strengths and patching up the weaknesses of Bacchus' extremely important second ability. Bacchus slowly leaps forward, and deals damage and knocks directly upward all enemies in the AoE when Bacchus hits them. And when in the second sector or higher on his passive, he will slow them as well. And remember, it's elite, so you can go over walls with it as well, a rarity for such a high impact CC ability. The usage of this ability is clear as soon as you see it. It's a long-range engagement tool that gets fights started like no other. It's pretty rare that you get a ranged CC ability like this that knocks up, because remember, knockups aren't affected by DR. So while you can use this ability raw, if you have other long-range CC on your team from your teammates, you can have them stun or root at long range, and then you follow up with this ability and get full use out of that huge knockup. But the flaws here are pretty obvious too. It's slow, so slow in fact you have to lead the ability once gods get their full passive movement speed at level 7. You need to lead it hard against gods with bonus movement speed, whether that be from items or abilities. And also that means knockup immune abilities, which yes, there aren't a lot of, but they do still exist, can easily be done in time to react to this ability. Now on that note, if whoever you're jumping on has fast enough fingers, you can definitely use purification beads in time to get away from the flop, or if you have very fast fingers, use a movement ability to avoid it entirely. All that said though, this ability is still Bacchus' best tool by a mile. And remember, even if one of those scenarios does happen, they blow a knockup immune ability, use their movement ability, or use their purification beads to avoid it, who cares? This is where not only Bacchus' low base cooldowns, but the power of the current cooldown reduction build comes in. So if you end up burning any of those options for the enemy team, all you have to do, since this ability has such decent range, is back up, wait for the cooldown, and try again. And if the enemy guy you hit eats the ability raw, sure, you have to rely on your team a bit to make sure they die, but they are definitely in a lot of trouble if Bacchus gets a hit with this ability. So there's not a lot of nuance here. If you see a good opportunity to leap in, leap in. If you miss the flop, you can walk away in shame. And if they use something to immune the knockup, back up, and try to use the knockup again as soon as you have it. Finally, if you just straight up hit this ability, you want to press forward as hard as you can. You typically do this with your third ability. Bacchus becomes knockup immune and begins dealing damage in a cone AoE in front of himself, and is able to move around completely freely, despite how it may look. He retains his normal movement speed and camera speed alike. Enemies damaged are also anti-healed by 40%. If they are hit by the final tick of damage while Bacchus is in a second section of his passive or above, they are stunned. Bacchus can cancel this ability at any time, but remember, you only get to stun with the very last tick of damage. So what that unfortunately means is that if Bacchus is CC'd out of this ability, he will not get the stun, and what you're left with is an ability that does 20 damage and applies some anti-heal. That's why you typically team it with Bacchus' second ability, but there's an issue here too. Flop in and start burping immediately to apply that damage, while making it more likely that you'll hit the final tick of the stun. Although, remember, that knockup applied stacks of diminishing returns, meaning that if you flop in and then burp, your stun will last for a shorter amount than it should. So this is a lackluster but necessary part of Bacchus' combos, and jokes aside about it not doing much damage when it gets interrupted, that anti-heal portion generally makes Bacchus a good anti-heal option. It's a lot like Sobek's anti-heal. Sure, you're not doing a lot of damage, but you cannot miss that ability, especially considering you can move around freely while casting this ability. So in turn, any god who needs anti-heal applied to them is getting anti-healed by Bacchus. Another positive is wave pressure. Clearly, you want an aggressive ADC with you while you're playing Bacchus, so what you can do for them is push the wave together with this ability while damaging it. And then they come in and easily hit the entire minion wave with any ability thanks to your wave suppression, allowing for further pressure in lane. All in all, even though it's not the best ability in the game, just like Bacchus' second ability, you really want to throw this out as often as possible. Again, to fish out abilities that can interrupt or avoid it, only to use it a few seconds later, where it will definitely have an impact now that those immunities are gone. If you want an ability that has an impact every time you use it though, look no further than Bacchus' ultimate. Bacchus deals damage in an AoE around himself, intoxicating all enemies hit, and gains bonus power if he's in the third sector of his passive. An Intoxicate is a unique type of CC, which will force the affected god to sway back and forth in whatever direction they're currently walking in. So in a sense, you could see this as an even more disorienting and heavy slow, because remember, if you walk side to side like this, you're moving slower thanks to the strafing movement speed penalty. That teamed with the intense burst of this ability means that it has a serious impact every time it's used. But of course, this is where Blink comes in, thanks to all the flaws with your second ability. Your second ability makes your intentions clear, and as we talked about, opens up the option for cleanses, immunities, and just generally people reacting to you more easily. Therefore, going in with Blink and then this ability immediately absolutely guarantees it will hit and enables you to start wreaking havoc. And that havoc wreaking, of course, entails what we've been talking about so far, just easier to perform thanks to the enemies being intoxicated now. It's a little difficult to get a hold of at first, but essentially, when you see enemies zigzagging around like that from the Intoxicate, remember that they're moving slower, and they'll be easier to hit with your second ability. And whatever angle they're moving at, they're forced to move at that angle for at least a second. So take that time to line up your flop, and do just that. Obviously, blinking in with the ult also gives you the chance to burn things like relics and movement abilities again. So when you do blink in with this ability, you don't want to flop on someone immediately. Wait for a moment or two to see if you burn things like beads, aegis, or a movement ability before continuing. A good way to do this while staying active in the fight is just activating your third ability after successfully ulting someone. This gives you the option to follow up off of your own CC or stun with the third ability. Or if this forces out a movement ability from them, you can simply cancel out your third ability at any time and chase them with the flop. This is Bacchus' bread and butter right here. Blink in with the ult, and then cycle between 2ing, 3ing, and keeping your passive topped up with your first ability. So in turn, your teamfight is defined by how well you utilize your blink ult. But what about during the early game and in times you don't have blink? Remember that the necessity of blink ulting only comes because of Bacchus' predictability in a teamfight environment. While in lane or in the early game, or while rotating in the mid game, your ultimate is still a great tool to use after just flopping on a target. Just to get that Intoxicate going and force out the enemy's purification beads. Because if anyone on your team is paying attention, any enemy god affected by the Intoxicate for the full 6 seconds should be dead well before the ability is over. The beauty of the ability is that it really fits in at any point of your combos. So on that note, let's take a look at some. 1, 2, 3. 1, blink, 3. Wait for a movement ability, then 2. Obviously, if you're already close to them, you don't need to blink into 3. 1, blink, ult, 3, wait for a movement ability or relic to end, then 2. 1, 2, ult, 3. 1, blink, 3, ult, then chase with your 2. For ability leveling, you are a 3 at level 1, and remember to chug up on your wine with your first ability in base before the match starts so that you can get to max passive stacks. And you stay in the fountain so that you don't actually lose any mana for doing this. And for that matter, make sure to do that throughout the game. Just top yourself off every time you're in the fountain. Then you're 2 at level 2. From there you max your 2, your 3, then your 1. Leveling the ultimate whenever you can. And of course, as you guessed, you don't level the 1 until there's nothing else to level. Bacchus is a total classic god of Smite. Bacchus is the drunk guy at the party who's great to be around because he's on your team. And to everyone else, he's very annoying. And smelly. But on a serious note, despite Bacchus' weaknesses, he's still a great asset to have on the team. I mean, how can you say no to burst damage on a knockup into a burst damage 6-second long CC? Well, that comes in while talking about being Bacchus. Actually, being the Bacchus requires you to dive deep into the enemy team, and rely on your teammates to completely finish jobs for you. Sure, Bacchus' damage is above average, but he still needs his team behind him to get the kills done, so diving deep into the enemy backline and getting a 2-man flop into a 3-man ult, burning relics and movement abilities right and left, only to look back and see your teammates are doing blue buff at 30 minutes is disheartening to say the least. Bacchus definitely seems good on paper, so let me give you a quick look at what an okay god like Bacchus can do versus what a really good god like Umoja can do. Let's explore their basic combos, with Bacchus 2, 3. Okay, did some burst damage, knocked up, and then stunned. All this taking about 3 seconds. Then let's take a look at Umoja's stun 1 and then reverse 3. Okay, did burst damage, stunned, then plucked the enemy. All this taking about 2 seconds. So I stunned and displaced the enemy, same as Bacchus. So less time, same amount of CC, but the big difference here, I'm over here. You see, I did pretty much everything Bacchus did, except maybe minus a little bit of damage, except I'm safe, I'm over here. There are a lot of other reasons Umoja is better than Bacchus, but let's not get lost in the weeds here. The simple fact of the matter is that most quote-unquote meta guardians don't have to hang themselves to this degree just to do basic combos. If they do, it's usually a more effective combo that can affect more targets or is harder to react to, like say Athena dash taunt. This isn't to dissuade you from playing Bacchus, he's a super fun god, and if you make the most of his ultimate, you will have an impact every game. It's also important you know where he's lacking and why he isn't picked every single game, because on paper, he should be nuts, but he just kinda isn't. He's more sort of a go-to aggressive support when other aggressive supports are already banned out, or if you need some anti-heal. But if you wanted that, you could just play Sobek instead, but I'm trying to give Bacchus a break here. If anything, Bacchus is worth learning just for the pure fun factor, because you can have a lot of insane plays on this god and have an awesome time with your ADC if you're duo queued with them. Anyone remember Shing's Bacchus? Good times. That's all I have on Bacchus for now. Thanks for watching.